Hello and welcome to this edition of the European Report. I'm Chris Mitchell, the Bureau Chief of CBN News here in Jerusalem, and I'll be your guest host for this edition. We're recording it in our CBN studio here in Jerusalem, and our guest today is Tomas Sandell, who many of you know. Tomas is the founding director of the European Coalition for Israel, or ECI, and CBN and ECI have a long history of cooperation. We're united in our love and support for Israel and the Jewish people, but more specifically, our interest in the San Remo Peace Conference of 1920 that incorporated the Balfour Declaration of 1917, which means that Israel's right to the land was enshrined into international law. British Foreign Secretary at the time, Lord Curzon, called the San Remo Declaration of April 25th the Magna Carta of the Jewish state. And 15 years ago, we went together to San Remo for the first time to commemorate the 90th anniversary of the San Remo Resolution. And Tomas, it's great to be with you. And we were just talking, 15 years, it's hard to believe it's been so long.
Absolutely, what amazing memories thinking back. And I think, Chris, I want to thank you again that you believed in this project, because as you remember, 1 week before we were to go to San Remo, there was a volcano in Iceland, and airspace over all of Europe were covered with ash from Iceland, meaning that no one could fly. So it should have been impossible to go to San Remo, but there was still some very courageous people. I think we were probably not more than 25 or 30, and you were one of them, and you came and you covered everything that we did in San Remo at that time. That is the 25th of April in 2010.
Yeah. It was a bit of a revelation, and actually I was debating, should I go, do I need to go? And I was so glad I made the decision to go, and it really was a revelation to me that San Remo happened, and it really did, as Lord Curzon said, the Magna Carta of Israel, and it gave legitimacy to the Jewish state in international law. And then when the light went on, I thought everybody needs to know this. And you've really been the champion of that for many years with ECI.
Well, we've been, by God's grace, we've been, in a way, a custodian, I think, in trying to raise awareness of what happened, to keep going back to San Remo, and because there's so much more to the story. You know, we're often thinking of the legal foundation which was established in 1920, but when I look at the memoirs, say, of Chaim Weizmann, who was there at the time, I recall one little segment in his in a chapter of San Remo where he said that it was such an amazing day, the last day of the conference, and Israel had just been given the mandate, the legal right to the land, and so this was Lord Balfour speaking, and he said when he came into the dinner room in the Hotel Royal, he saw the Jewish delegation and the Arab delegation sitting at one table, and they were so happy, and he was so peaceful, and he said, you know, peace is possible in the Middle East after all. So it was a real peace conference to the very meaning of that word. And I think what we need today is really people of goodwill who want to have a fresh look at the situation in the Middle East and really work towards peace, but peace in a way which is aligned with truth, and I think in this sense also the biblical covenant with the Jewish people.
Sure. And just to rehearse a little bit, we referred to it in the introduction, is that in 1917, the Balfour Declaration said they favor the establishment of a Jewish homeland in the land called Palestine at that time, almost verbatim put into the San Remo Resolution, the treaty, and then endorsed by the League of Nations. And for the establishment of a Jewish home, a mandate given to the British government to establish that, and land that included not only current Israel, but Jordan as well. I mean, it's, and so this preceded the West Bank. This preceded any of the future UN resolutions. And just to make a exclamation point, when the United Nations was formed, they assumed all the other resolutions passed by the League of Nations.
Exactly. And I mean, this is something, having worked in the European Parliament now for almost 25 years, you don't find one member of European Parliament who would know about this. And this is something which it's not esoteric in any way. If you go to an encyclopedia or even to Wikipedia today, you'll find this information. And as you rightly said, at the time, even what is today, Jordan was included in this mandate. So what happened when Transjordan was established, because of the involvement of Winston Churchill, there was in fact an Arab Palestine and a Jewish Palestine. So a two-state solution in a way goes way back to 1921. Mm-hmm. And this is often neglected in debates and discussions.
And what has happened? I mean, I would remind, I'm reminded that when we were there on the 90th anniversary, Danny Danon, who is now the Israeli ambassador to the UN, he was the only Knesset member that joined us, and it was a remarkable meeting. But tell us what's happened since then, 15 years. So
obviously 5 years ago there was the centennial, the 100th anniversary, and we were planning, we had big plans for events in San Remo, and then came COVID. But nevertheless, and again, Chris, you were part of what we did online on the 100th anniversary. And I think the significance of what happened when we did it was an online, I think 1 or 2 hours from Jerusalem, was not only that the Prime Minister Netanyahu spoke at the event, but for the first time in world history, world leaders acknowledged the San Remo Resolution and its significance. So we had a long list of government leaders who wrote personal letters of acknowledgement. And I remember the Italian Prime Minister at the time, he wrote a very beautiful letter to say that some of the seeds of what would later become the Israeli olive tree were planted in Italian soil in San Remo, Italy in 1920. And that's exactly what happened. But from looking back 15 years ago, there was hardly no one who knew about the significance. And at the 100th anniversary, you had a long list of government leaders who had been invited to submit a greeting to Israel. And they did, and meaning that for the first time, they had to study what happened in San Remo, and then came the acknowledgement. So I think that was an amazing event. A few months later, actually in the autumn of 2020, there was a concert in San Remo, live concert with no one less than Andrea Bocelli, a very world-renowned Italian tenor. So 1 month from now, when we're sitting here in the studio, there will be the 105th anniversary, and we will again be in San Remo to celebrate.
Just to go back in the history, why the San Remo conference was even held was because of World War I, and this land before World War I was part of the Ottoman Empire. So the major powers that won the war, literally divided up the Middle East, and that's why much of the Middle East looks the way it is right now.
And of course we have to acknowledge that not all the decisions made in San Remo, in retrospect, were very productive or sustainable. So it's interesting to say that Israel is probably only state which it's not a failed state, and it's a state that has been flourishing despite all the opposition in the region. And I think that's really the beauty of looking back now at 105 years, that what was decided in San Remo, just the rightness of it, that here is a flourishing democracy in the middle of a region which is not really known for fundamental rights, human rights, and rule of law and democracy.
You're here right now in Jerusalem for a conference, but you're also meeting with some Israeli leaders. What do they perceive? What are their feelings about the San Remo Resolution? What are you hearing from them?
I think and it's mentioned, it's interesting you mentioned Danny Danon, who was at the time a very young, new member of the Knesset, but it seems like in 15 years, those who had an understanding and wanted to stand on these legal rights have been elevated in Israeli politics. So today, I would say from the President Herzog down, with the Prime Minister, the Foreign Minister, Deputy Foreign Minister. They are all great believers in the significance of San Remo. And they are very excited, perhaps a little bit surprised, who is this Gentile, coming from Finland speaking to us about San Remo. We should, of course, take responsibility. But I think what happened again in 1920, the beauty of it, again, was there were Jews and Christians who came together. And without Christians like Lord Balfour, like David Lloyd George, humanly speaking, the Jewish state would never have come into being. My vision is to see this same alliance being reestablished, that those who believe in Judeo-Christian values, who believe in the biblical promises, believe in the covenant, can come together and in a way reclaim the promises made in San Remo in 1920.
Do you feel like in some sense maybe you're standing on their shoulders, carrying on the same message? Well,
I think that would be to overstep. I'm just a simple guy from the north of Finland. But the interesting thing is again that over the years I have gotten to know the descendants both of Lord Balfour and especially of David Lloyd George. And I was here with one of his great-grandson 2 years ago, and it was a fascinating story for him. And we went, of course, to David Lloyd George Street, and he is just as committed as his great-grandfather in supporting the Jewish people. So in that sense, there is the connection of those who were there in 1920 and those of us who are now supporting Israel, especially in the corridors of power, if you want to use that expression.
Yeah, you're also going to be attending a conference here in Jerusalem on anti-Semitism. Tell us about that and why is it so important right now?
Yeah, well, sadly, as we all know, there's been a dramatic rise in anti-Semitism. And after October 7, which makes absolutely no sense. So anyone watching world events will have to ask themselves the question, well, how can it be, after 80 years after the Holocaust, that we still don't get it, that we hear the same vocabulary in not only on the streets of Europe, but at the elite universities in the United States and in Europe. And if this is the way that the future leaders are thinking, we just imagine where we will be in 5 years, 10 years, 15 years from now. So if there has ever been a time to remain vigilant and combat anti-Semitism, that time is now.
Yeah. Last night we were down at Ben Gurion Airport and doing a story on nearly 50 French Jews coming back, immigrating to Israel, and I think about 11 or 12 Jews from Russia. They were all saying, the ones from France, that it's far worse than you can imagine. And that many of them would rather come to a war zone and feel safer than living actually in France. How would you describe maybe anti-Semitism in Europe itself? You European and you travel throughout the continent.
Yeah. Of course, when you look at Europe as a whole, there are a few observations. One is that a Jewish person is much safer in the East than in the West. So when we look at a country like Hungary, which is being accused of anti-Semitism at the moment, there's probably no place in Europe where a Jew can walk more safely on the streets than in Budapest. The same is true for Poland and other countries that historically have been very problematic for the Jewish people. But go to Brussels, go to Amsterdam, go to Paris, go to Marseille, and you would not dare to reveal anything that would identify you as a Jewish person. And we see this also in statistics, surveys, be it the European Union, their own surveys, that a large majority of the young Jews are not asking whether they will move to Israel, but when is the right time. So, and I think this is, for Europe, it's being repeated by our leaders that when the Jews are leaving Europe, then we are really in trouble. And it was the Secretary General of the United Nations who said that when the Jews left Portugal, that they were expelled. of course, during the Inquisition. That's when the decline of Portugal started. And that's when the Renaissance of the Netherlands started, because that's where the Portuguese Jews went. So it's terrible news for Europe, the time when the time has come when the Jews don't feel safe and secure and are considering leaving.
So it might actually accelerate the decline of some of these nations historically, and we've seen it historically.
Very much so, and of course it's always controversial to speak about immigration and Islamization, but of course what has happened after the Holocaust is, of course, that we lost these 6 million Jews, many of them future Nobel Peace Prize winners, musicians, artists, this and that. And we brought in millions and millions of people from a different culture with a different religion, and who have had a difficult time being assimilated in Europe. And that is not, of course, to say that all Muslims who came, are of bad will, but we do have a problem with radical Islam in Europe. And when the forces of radical Islam and the extreme left find each other, it becomes a very deadly and toxic cocktail.
Yeah.
And that's what we are experiencing on the college campuses and also on the streets of Brussels and elsewhere.
Yeah, and college campuses in America as well. And right now there's certainly a battle going on to see who of some of these agitators can or can't be deported by the current administration. Yeah. You are very much involved in people in the European Parliament. How would you describe the makeup right now of the Parliament itself, and which direction do you see it going?
Yeah, I think the question is relevant also as it relates to the conference here in Jerusalem, because as you know, there was some controversy who should be invited, who should be disinvited.
Yeah, by the minister.
And I wrote an op-ed where I made the point to say that the Jewish people can't afford to disinvite anyone who wants to be their friends at this time. And I think it's also, you clearly have those also on the extreme right that will have nothing to do with Israel, with the Jewish people. But you have others who are in a way reorienting themselves. And I think this is true for many, if not all, political parties after the Second World War. They had to reinvent themselves when it comes to relations to the Jewish people. And I could name many, many prominent parties. So we shouldn't, I think those who really are expressing in words and deeds that they want to stand with the Jewish people today, they should be the first to be embraced by the pro-Israel community and not the first one to be expelled.
Yeah. And what do you expect to come out of this conference?
Well, I've been to many conferences, and I know the dangers with usually we can become very theoretical, and I think the best we can wish for is that this would be give a new injection into the movement for combating anti-Semitism. Personally, I also hope that it would bring in more political parties in the camp. Because we have done a pro-Israel ranking in the European Parliament, or it wasn't us, it was a research institute, which very clearly shows which are the parties which stand with Israel, in political decisions, which are the parties that never stands with Israel. So it's very clear, on that ranking. And I think a party, in this case, a Spanish party, opposition party, Vox, who scored, if I'm not mistaken, almost 99%, should not be expelled from such a conference. They should be welcomed. Whereas we need to find new ways of engaging with the progressives, which have a very poor record of standing with Israel currently at the European Parliament. Yeah. But I would say that by and large, the trend in Europe now is there is a wake-up call, and there is a greater understanding of what Israel is going through. And I hope that this will really also mean better relations with Israel.
Sure. I can remember the first time we met Tomas, a mutual friend of ours, was hosting, I think it might have been a brunch right here in Jerusalem. And Rick Ridings, our mutual friend, said, "You got to know Tomas." So it's been really a joy to see you. And really, you've really enriched my understanding of the region and of its history because of what you do. So ECI is celebrating its 25th anniversary. It's pretty remarkable and at quite a time in history. Tell us your ideas of what you've done in the past 25 years and where do you see the next 25?
Yeah, so just to correct myself, maybe, you know, we're going 23, but we're coming close to 25, okay. And I look at the big numbers. I think we're preparing for the 25th. But of course, what situation, say 25 years ago in Europe, was that there was nobody in the corridors of power speaking up for the Jewish people, except for the Israeli embassy. Later, of course, there were a number of Jewish organizations who saw the need to speak up. But what for me was significant was, because I always think back as a bit of a historian, you know, what was missing in the 1930s? There was nobody speaking up for the Jewish people unless they were Jews themselves. And I sometimes speak about the Evian conference in 1938. And many say that was the last chance to stop Hitler, when Roosevelt invited the nations to Evian, France, to answer the question, what are we going to do with the Jewish refugees? And country after country after country said that, you know, it's a terrible problem, there's nothing we can do. Canada said that our country is not large enough to receive Jewish refugees. And Australia said that we don't have any anti-Semitism, we are not keen on importing any either. And you know the story from the U.S., of course, with the ship that could not.
That's right.
Could not bring the Jewish refugees to the United States either. So, and I often, looking at the minutes from that meeting, I realized that there was nobody who would have raised the issue and said, you know, listen, certainly there's something we should be able to do. And I don't think it takes thousands and thousands to change history. I think it takes a few. And I think, you know, from the Bible we see, you know, 12 is a good number, and I'm happy to announce that we are more than 12 in the European Coalition for Israel today. Yeah. So the fact that there is this voice is prophetically so important for me, and I think for Christians in Europe. And a voice which is today recognized, meaning that when I come to Jerusalem, I receive the President's office and Foreign Minister's office. But likewise in Europe, that people know that there is this coalition and they have a different message and we need to listen to them.
Yeah, and I would say not only here in Israel or in Brussels at the European Parliament, but the United Nations in New York City as well. Yeah. You have a presence there. And I think you've had the United Nations recognize Yom Kippur as a holiday.
Exactly, and I think again, you know, sometimes it's not bad to be small. And we know the story of David and Goliath and so many others. So
Gideon and his 300.
Exactly. So we're a small organization, but the fact that when people ask this, they assume you are Israeli. They say, "Oh, you're Jewish." And then they get really surprised and say, wait a minute, you're not Israeli, you're not Jewish, what are you? And then they say, oh, now we get it, you're American. and we say, well, actually not, we are European. And that gives us, you know, an advantage, because people start asking questions, you know, why would you care? Because you're not Jewish. And then I can tell my story, why we should all care.
Yeah. Well, tell us how people can pray for you and ECI, and how can people find out more about what you do and help support you?
Yeah. Well, we have a website, of course. If you Google European Coalition for Israel, EC4i.org, you'll find more information. Yeah, we're not funded by any other government, so funding is crucial, but as you rightly said, prayer even more so. This is not only a legal battle, a media battle, it is a spiritual battle, it always has been. But we'd like to be practical, like Mordecai and Esther. You know, we like to stand before the decision makers, the kings and queens of this world, while we pray, and we have others who pray with us. And we know in the case of Esther that was a very successful model. And by the way, ECI was founded without us, you know, coordinating anything on Purim in 2003. So when we had the founding meeting, and someone said afterwards, I have a feeling this is an important day in the Jewish calendar. I don't know which one. And we looked and we saw, wow, this is Purim for such a time as this, story of Esther. So we'd like to be modern Esthers and Mordecai. And if we perish, we perish, but we're going to continue going.
Yeah, wow, it's a great story. So here we are, almost 25 years for ECI, 15 years after San Remo. Any final thoughts?
Well, San Remo for us, it's, as I said, it's very important because it happened in Europe. We have a responsibility for Europe in particular. It's also important because it was great things happened with Jews and Christians come together in the right spirit. And we'd like to see more of this in years to come.
Yeah, and you know, one other person that changed history was Eddie Jacobson, who was very influential, and President Harry Truman, who recognized the Jewish state just 11 minutes after David Ben-Gurion.
Exactly.
So, so small numbers can make a difference.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Tomas Sandell, it's great to be with you. Thanks for all you do through ECI and your relationships here in Israel, New York, Brussels, and literally around the world. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Chris.